Good evening. Our group chose to do our presentation on exergaming to increase physical activity. Our group members consisted of myself, Kayla Akers, Karina Castaneda, Carrie Lee, Jessica Osteen, and Katie Turney. This is just a little bit about us. I am a newlywed and a dog mom of 3. I live in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm a registered behavior technician at BACA, which stands for the Behavior Analysis Center for Autism in Zionsville, Indiana. I received my bachelor's degree in speech and hearing sciences from Indiana University in 2010, and I am currently enrolled in my second semester of the ABA program through Ball State. Once I finish my master's degree, I plan on sitting for the board exams to become a BCBA, and I hope to obtain a position in a school setting. And I also currently manage my own small cupcake business out of my home, and I hope to one day open my own bakery and employ individuals with autism to put my knowledge and skills as a BCBA to use in that setting. Up next, you're going to hear from Karina about her.
Hi guys, I'm Karina Castaneda. I graduated in December of 2018 with my bachelor's in early childhood development. I currently live in Miami, where I was born and raised. I work at an ABA clinic in Canton, Florida. I'm also in my second semester at Ball State, where I plan to sit for my board exams and become a BCBA, like Kayla said. So next up, we're gonna hear from our next participants or group members.
Hi, I am Carrie Lee, and I am a licensed teacher. I live in Brownsburg with my husband and my 2 boys. I graduated in 2000 from Indiana University with a degree in early childhood primary education. I've taught for 19 years. I've taught grades pre-K to second, and I've been using a lot of ABA strategies in my classroom since I started. After graduating from Ball State, I hope to consult with teachers and school districts about behaviors. Next up is Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm 27. I live in Clearwater, Florida. I've lived here my whole life. I am currently an RBT at M. Bloom Autism Services here in Clearwater. I graduated from University of South Florida with a bachelor's degree, and I'm currently in my second semester at Ball State, and I'm pursuing my master's degree in ABA with emphasis in autism to become a BCBA after graduation. Up next is Katie.
Hi, my name's Katie Turney. I'm living in St. Joseph, Michigan. I am a registered behavior technician, and I work for the Logan Autism Center. What's kind of cool about Logan is that we are the only autism center, one of the only ones in the area. So we have a ton of clients and a wide variety, and we are set up like a school. So even though it's a center, we have a school layout. So it's different and it's fun and I love it. I began this field 5 years ago in Indianapolis, where I also worked at BACA, and I plan on graduating from Ball State and getting my board certified behavior analysis certification.
Okay guys, so what is exergaming? Exergaming has become pretty popular. It's a technology that uses interactive games to increase exercise behavior. So video games are different auditory or visual stimuli that are paired with different types of exercise equipment and activities. So we've all heard of Pokemon Go. That's a great example of something that's become more popular to increase physical activity, especially in children and even adults who like it too. So the purpose of this study is to use an exergaming method to increase our physical activity to at least 30 minutes per day, 2 times a week. So we all know that the childhood obesity rate has been rising extraordinarily. Some might say it's due purely to a lack of physical activity, and kids would rather stay indoors, playing video games, doing whatever it is that they rather be doing than being outside and exercising. So exergaming was designed, like I said, to incorporate gaming and physical activity, and it's become more popular over the past few years. The study evaluated the effects of exergaming on physical activity among 4 inactive 5th graders. So 2 of them were girls and 2 of them were boys, and it was designed in a PE classroom. Results of that study showed that exergaming produced substantially more minutes of physical activity than did the standard PE program. So on top of all that, the Exergaming was socially acceptable and reinforcing to the students and all. And next up, we're going to hear from Kate.
I did the literature review. We used a few different articles in this, but I'm going to talk about the two main ones that we chose to talk about. The first one is Exergaming Feels Good Despite Working Harder, from Glenn, Eston, Lochster, and Parfit in 2017. So this study was 20 participants, 16 women from 18 to 40 years old. The participants had no previous experience using Exergaming, with the majority below the average fitness level for their age group. So this kind of ties in with why I chose this article for our study, because all 4 of the 5 of us kind of have low levels of fitness for our age groups, and really don't use Exergaming in our daily lives. So going back to this literature review, the purpose of the study was to compare the physiological and psychological responses to self-selected exercise intensity on an Exergaming ergometer in a control mode. So no visual distraction, to a track, which would be like a woodland circuit on a computer that you kind of ride through. And then the game mode, which was chasing dragons for treasures. And on that mode, you could switch directions and then also receive points and collect points. The dependent variables for this study were work rate, heart rate, perceived exertion, affect, disassociation, and enjoyment. So there were 2 sessions in the study. The first session, the participants cycled on a stationary bike at a very light pace with an RPE of 9 for 3 minutes. Then they moved up the RPE to 11 and then repeated this at an RPE of 13 and 15, which was considered heavy exertion. Heart rate, pulmonary, ventilation, and oxygen were measured throughout each of these stations. And then in session 2, the participants were assigned a randomly allotted order for exercise modes. Each participant engaged in a 15-minute session of the control mode, which again was the blank screen. And then a track mode, which was a 1.5 mile loop, and then the game mode, which was the chasing dragons. And then the participants were told they would exercise in 15-minute intervals, and they could choose their own intensity. So the results were as followed for the study. Work rate was considered higher in the track and game modes than the control mode. So when they had a visual distraction or audio distraction, it was a lot higher than having nothing and just exercising on a plain stationary bike. Heart rate was also about the same in all 3 modes, no matter what. Perceived exertion was higher in the game and track modes than the control mode, and disassociation and enjoyment were higher in the game mode over the track mode, but also the track mode was higher than control mode. So this shows that the game mode showed the most enjoyment and disassociation. So the hypotheses were generally supported with the participants exercising at a higher intensity in the Exergaming modes than the control mode, with more positive effect throughout the exercise bouts. Disassociation and enjoyment were higher during Exergaming modes and highest during game mode, in support of the hypothesis that more immersive and distracting and enjoyable, the more enjoyable the experience was. So moving on, our second literature review is called Exergaming Impact on Physical Activity and Interest in Elementary School Children, which was done by Research Quarterly for Exercise and Sport. So I wanted to use this article because it most closely was designed or studied like our original study. So the participants were 4th grade students ages 9 to 12. They were chosen for this study because they were supposed to experience a comprehensive fitness education unit for the first time. The instructional condition for this study was that there were 8 different exergaming stations. One was cat eye game bikes, one Zavix boxing, one 3-kick. Another one was 2 dog flight simulators. Another one they used was Nintendo Wii. Another station, well, they had 4 stations of DDR, and then 2 gamer size activities and 2 XR boards. All the games require the players to interact physically. So this means using arm, leg, or whole body movements with on-screen images in various activities such as tennis, baseball, football, boxing, biking, dancing, snowboarding, kicking, and stepping. So I like this because our behavior definition uses whole body movements. So that was the first unit, okay? And then in another unit, the students learned activities to develop cardiovascular fitness. So this would be jump rope, running, jogging, and endurance training. And this unit was taught on a playground blacktop. The lesson organization also follows station structure. Frequently used stations included jump rope, basketball, dribble circles, speed pacer, active stick bowling, volley with paddles or rackets, hula hoops, and step aerobics. And each of these units lasted 4 weeks. And so that was pretty close to our study as well. This study selected 1 lesson per week for data collection. Each class was observed and measured 4 times per unit. The protocol allowed to alternate data collection between cardiovascular fitness lessons and exergaming lessons to generate parallel comparable data sets. Accelerometers were collected after each lesson and data were immediately downloaded to the computer. The purpose of this study was to determine the difference between elementary school physical education students in-class physical activity and situational interest motivation, an exergaming unit, and a fitness education unit. So it's kind of like our original study where we're trying to figure out what is more appealing to the kids, where we're going to get the most motivation. Data displayed a complex scenario using exergaming as a viable content in physical education, demonstrating the motivational power of exergaming with heightened situational interests that attracted the children. The results also clearly indicated that exergaming's motivational power may reside in lasting effects of challenge, exploration, and instant enjoyment. However, data revealed that the 8 exergaming stations in the physical education class did not provide moderate and vigorous physical activity for the children in the study. The findings clearly have verified the motivational effect of situational interest, according to Schieffel, 2009. More so than the cardiovascular fitness lessons, exergaming created unique person-activity interactions that provided novel and innovative experiences, challenged the children cognitively, and elicited a high level of instant enjoyment, led to explorations of ever-changing game situations, and demanded high attention in playing the games. So in other words, students perceived significantly higher levels of situational interest in the exergaming unit than they did in the cardiovascular fitness unit on the playground blacktop. The empirical evidence supports the motivation assumption of exergaming beyond antecedent manifestations from daily observations. It can be concluded that exergaming exerts strong, appealing characteristics capable of inducing a high level of situational interest motivation. The motivation derived from the exergaming activity can be conceived to be representative of a typical intrinsic motivation rarely seen in children and even older learners, according to Deci and Ryan, 1985. So the findings in this article show that playing exergaming requires higher overall cognitive engagement, which means the attention and demand exploration dimensions suggest the cognitive demands in exergaming can be more intense than those in the traditional cardiovascular fitness that we see in our traditional physical education. This cognitive engagement might be due to students' need to construct mental models that help them navigate through the games. According to Hayes and Silberman, 2007, illustrated that exergaming players need to develop a wide range of mental models about how to act in playing the games to assist their decision-making process in a range of potential situations. Such mental models will lead to better and faster decisions, according to Chamberlain and Kalo, 1993, and Starks and Lindley, 1994. Again, the findings iterate that the fact that the teacher contributes to and enhances the student's positive experience in physical education and provides benefits to children. Exergaming may elicit higher situational interest motivation, but it may not be able to actualize the motivation into beneficial experience in physical education. It seems that exergaming creates a setting in which the machine-person interaction constrains physical movement. The motivation of the game helps create a mental process that is difficult for children to redeem or transfer into actions with beneficial physical movements. So in conclusion, the data from this study have provided evidence that exergaming can be a viable source of situational interest motivation. However, exergaming should not take the place of other physical activity during physical education. For now, it may be wise to use exergaming to enhance or complement the curriculum, but not solely rely on that for physical fitness. It is also clear that the motivation derived from exergaming may not lead to adequate amounts of physical activity for children to receive health benefits from exergaming. The observed low physical activity output in exergaming poses a challenge to physical educators and those who believe exergaming will lead to enhance the health benefits. So these two articles, I think, go hand in hand with our original study and then the study we conducted as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kayla for the behavior definition.
Thank you, Katie. The behavior definition that we created for this study replication was for physical activity, and we defined that as moving at least one large muscle group, for example, the legs, arms, back, or abdominals, while engaging in an on-screen activity or game for at least 1 minute and without stopping for longer than 30 seconds. An example of this definition would be participants dancing when instructed for at least 1 minute while playing Just Dance and not stopping for longer than 30 seconds. Some non-examples, one would be a participant running to a trash can to throw away garbage. And then the second one that we came up with was a participant raising her arms to take off her sweatshirt when she gets too hot or overheated. Next, I'm going to talk about the design of our study. The original study used an alternating treatment design, or an ATD. The experiment would randomly alternate between PE classes with exergaming and PE classes without exergaming. This presented an issue for our group because the introduction of a PE class without exergaming would have been an extra treatment for us since it wasn't a previously existing activity for all of us. So we decided to use a baseline phase to attempt to collect data on exercise levels prior to introducing the games. By removing that random alternation with the PE class, our study suddenly stopped following an alternating treatment design. So we had a little bit of an issue with that, but we decided to add a third phase into the study to make up for that loss of ATD. And during this third phase, the games that we decided to play were chosen randomly and in a random order. And the inclusion of this phase helped return our design to the alternating treatment design. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, and she is going to talk about the materials that we used.
For the materials, we didn't all have the same gaming systems, so we chose to use our cell phones and find apps that were AR so that we could still do Exergaming. So to do this study, we all needed cell phones with access to a data plan so that you can play it outside of your home. And we needed to download 9 apps: Ingress, Pokemon Go, Jurassic World, Walking Dead Our World, Zombies Run, The Walk, Wizards Unite, Superfly Smash, and geocaching. We also needed a stopwatch or timer so that we could time ourselves while we were playing so that we know how long we were engaged in physical activity. And finally, we all needed access to Google Docs so that we could collectively input our data. The setting for the majority of the Exergame apps required participants to walk outside a short distance so that you could play the game as it was intended. One game didn't require that. So 2 participants in the study live in Indiana and 1 lives in Michigan. The outdoor temperatures for these 3 participants were mostly in the high 50s to low 60s, with the exception of the last week of the intervention where the temperatures were in the low teens to mid 20s and snowing. The other 2 participants live in Florida, where the outdoor temperatures were mostly in the high 80s to low 90s during the intervention phase. So we added a baseline procedure for our assignment, even though it wasn't in the original. And baseline data was taken the week prior to introducing the first intervention phase. Each of the 5 participants monitored their daily physical activity levels, like going to the gym or going on walks with your dog or anything like that, following the operational definition of physical activity for our study. And then we collected data on those 5 days and recorded that onto a data table shared with the group. The original study didn't include that. We used this instead of the alternating PE class, because like we said before, that would be an extra intervention that we needed some baseline for. So the first intervention, the dependent variables of the study were the total number of minutes engaged in physical activity by each participant and the total number of minutes engaged in physical activity with each Exergame during the 10-minute sessions. Duration data were collected using a stopwatch or timer. Each intervention consisted of 3 Exergames with 2 sessions per game for 3 weeks, equaling a total of 18 sessions. The Exergames were played back-to-back in groups of 3 for a total duration of 30 minutes. The 3 games that were played each week were predetermined and agreed upon by each participant. In the original study, students were given 10 minutes at each predetermined Exergaming station for a total duration of 30 minutes. So we did stick to that as closely as possible. For the second intervention phase, to bring us back to an ATD design, each of the 5 participants took the top 3 games that produced the most physical activity, and we compared them against each other. This intervention is still in place, so you won't see that data reflected on our graphs. So each of us drew a random game of the 3 from a hat to decide the order in which to play the games. The 3 games in a random order are going to be played 10 minutes each, back to back, for a total of 30 minutes for 3 sessions per game. This intervention, oh, I already said that. Okay. For data collection, we all use stopwatches, and data are presented as the total number of minutes each member engaged in the target behavior, physical activity, during the 10-minute session.
So these are some examples of our data collection forms, what we used to share with each other via Google Docs. The one on the far left you'll see is the baseline. So we just had our names and then the dates of our exercising for that first week, the total number of minutes, and then we used each day to average how many minutes that week that we had engaged in physical activity. And then in the middle, you'll see the different tables for each intervention. So each week that we changed the game. So during the first week, we used the first 3 apps that we had already predetermined for our schedule. During the second week, the next 3, and during the third week, the last 3. And then we, like we've mentioned, we decided to add this third phase comparison to help get us back to that alternating treatment design. So we chose the game and then randomly chose the order. So you'll see that the first one is 1, 2, 3, and then next maybe 2, 1, 3. It varied for each of us. And then we just tracked the total number of minutes that we engaged in those activities for that phase.
For treatment fidelity, each week all participants input their data into a shared Google Doc. This process allowed the group to recognize errors that occurred for 3 participants during the first week of the treatment. 3 participants were recording physical activity within the Exergame past the 10-minute session. A brief discussion rectified the issue, and only 1 participant had this error for week 2, and no participants had this error in week 3. Participants also recorded a full 10-minute session once a week via screen recording to provide IOA data to the second observer. For 1 participant, she was unable to collect Exergaming data for the first 2 weeks of the experiment past baseline, and it began to snow outside for the northern participants in the last week of the study, so the participants were unable to participate in Exergaming during that time. For IOA data, participants chose 1 out of the 6 10-minute sessions each week to conduct IOA data. Participants used screen recording to record the full duration of the session. The participants then sent the 10-minute screen recording to an assigned second observer. The second observer used a stopwatch or timer to record the duration of physical activity displayed in the video. The lesser duration was then divided by the greater duration. The number given was then multiplied by 100 to produce a percentage.
Up next, we're going to talk about the participants of this study. They included a total of 5 females with a mean age of 31.4 years old. Each participant had relatively low amounts of weekly exercising prior to implementation of the study, which is one of the reasons why we chose this, to see if we could get those levels to increase. Jessica is a 27-year-old female from Clearwater, Florida. Katie is a 33-year-old female from St. Joseph, Michigan. Carrie is a 41-year-old female from Brownsburg, Indiana. Karina is a 23-year-old female in Miami, Florida. And myself, Kayla Akers, I am a 32-year-old female in Indianapolis, Indiana. Up next, Carrie is going to talk about her results and IOA data.
Okay, so you can see on my graph that I did not meet treatment fidelity the first week. I actually went over. So I rectified that the second and third weeks, and I was pretty consistent with my time. My baseline average was 7 minutes. My baseline range was 0 to 15 minutes. My intervention average was 8.40 minutes, and my intervention range was 5.08 to 14.9 minutes. My physical activity actually decreased from the first phase until the last. Some of the games were not engaging, and they did not increase my physical activity. Weather and schedule conflicts also deterred me from using the Exergames more. My actual weekly exercise routine motivates me more than Exergaming. So my IOA data was collected for the second sessions of Wizards Unite, Jurassic World, and Ingress. The IOA data for Wizards Unite was 28%. Jurassic World was 12.3%. Ingress was 97%. I ran into some issues with the games and not having enough space to move around while playing them. The games didn't show much movement because of this, so my IOA was low. And then my IOA data was taken by Jessica, and the videos were shared through YouTube and text. Next up is Ayla.
So to start off, my baseline, my activity levels are extremely low. I do not enjoy exercising whatsoever. So I was hoping that this study would maybe help to increase my exercise levels. However, during the first 2 weeks of our treatment implementation, I was getting ready to plan a wedding, and then that was for the first week, and then the second week I had my wedding. So I wasn't able to follow the schedule as much as I would have liked. My first, my baseline average was 4.6 minutes. The range was between 2 and 6 minutes. And then for the intervention phase, I averaged 6.38 minutes, and the range was from 0 to 10 minutes. I was, like I said, unable to complete Exergaming sessions during the first 2 weeks of the study due to personal circumstances at that time. And I'm one of those group members who lives in northern Indiana, so I was hesitant to go outside to complete these activities due to the cold and snow. But because we chose to implement this other phase of the treatment to help us return to ATD, I was able to complete more physical activities using these Exergames, and helped return myself back to a normal phase of activity levels. For my IOA, I sent my videos to Karina via YouTube, and I used that for Our World, the Walking Dead game, Superfly Smash, and Zombies Run. The agreement between Karina and myself showed 14% for Our World, 93% for Superfly Smash, and 73% of agreement for Zombies Run. I think the data inaccuracies could be due to the fact that we relied on the phone screen while engaging in the Exergames rather than being able to actually watch each member exercise at that time. And as Carrie said before, it's hard to tell when somebody is actually moving versus not moving just by looking at a phone screen that doesn't always show your actual levels of activity and movements. So up next, we're going to have Katie discuss her results.
So I live in Michigan. So this time of year is not ideal to do anything outside unless you're really bundled up and committed. And I don't usually do any kind of exercise besides walk my dog when she needs it. So you can see I have one day that I spent 20 minutes walking my dog. And that was in my baseline. Otherwise, we're at a 0. So very low physical fitness in my baseline. My baseline range was from 0 to 20 minutes. And my baseline average was 4 minutes. When we got into intervention, my intervention average was 3.8 minutes, and the intervention range was 0 to 11.4 minutes. For me, this intervention did not work because it was kind of aversive. I would rather just walk with like headphones in, listening to music or a podcast, rather than be looking at the screen all the time. So I did not think this was a very reinforcing condition. And you can see that the weather also took effect as well in my participation with this. So next we'll go to my IOA. Jessica, that's a misprint there. Jessica did my IOA, and we uploaded it on YouTube. So my IOA data was taken for the first session of Wizards Unite with 100%, the first session of Pokemon Go with a 99%, and finally the first session of Ingress with a 98%. And I think with such high data or IOA data that I walked the entire time So I let them know, like, hey, I walked the entire time because I didn't think we were supposed to stop and like cast spells and all of that. So what you're seeing on the screen is I'm continually moving through that. So I just let my IOA collector know that I was continually moving.
All right, hi guys. So my baseline average was 7. The intervention average for me was 4.5, and the intervention range was 0 to 10 minutes and 37 seconds. So I'm usually a gym frequent. However, during my baseline phase, unfortunately, my physical activity was much lower than it usually would be. So as I mentioned, my physical activity during my baseline phase was just 7 minutes. But in all, I found that the Exergaming apps actually decreased my physical activity over the course of these weeks. The usual times that I would go to the gym or do any type of exercise, I had to play the Exergaming apps because I work full time, school, so that extra free time was used to do the Exergaming. Yeah, I would also agree with Katie. I didn't find these games reinforcing at all. I'd rather go to the gym, take a class, than walk around with my phone. And I also, if we go to the next slide, to my IOA, my data was collected by Carrie, and it was based on the second sessions of the game Superfly Smash, Jurassic World, and Ingress. The agreement between Carrie and I showed 53% agreement for Superfly Smash, 29% of agreement for Jurassic World, and 63% of agreement for Ingress. So I would say that the data inaccuracies, such as the 29% of agreement for Jurassic World, may have also been due to how Kayla was mentioning that you're not actually viewing the participant exercising. So like Katie said, I was moving while I was exercising, but the person watching the video and taking the IOA data may not know that while it may look like you're stopped, you're actually walking. So I would say that some of the inaccuracies of the agreements may have been due to that. Next, we're going to hear from Jessica and her results.
I also feel like this intervention didn't work. My data average for baseline was 12.5 minutes. My range for baseline was 5. My data average for the intervention phase was only 5.27 minutes, and my range for the intervention phase was 6.73. The game Ingress produced the best results with 10 out of 10 minutes, but that's because I don't know if the game was underdeveloped, but nothing ever happened. So unlike Wizards Unite or Pokemon Go, where you can cast spells or catch Pokemon, in Ingress I'm just walking around, just waiting for anything to happen. I found it the least entertaining, but it produced the most physical activity. The intervention didn't work for me. Just generally, I find the games, I find at least Wizards Unite reinforcing it, but the rest of them I didn't really care for. My IOA data were collected on the first session of the games Wizards Unite, Jurassic World, and Ingress. The IOA data showed 99% agreement for Wizards Unite and 100% agreement for Ingress. Before I sent my video, I let my IOA person, who was Katie, know that every time I stopped to cast a spell, I stopped moving. So that's where she could stop collecting the data. So that made it a little easier for us to collect IOA. My IOA data only showed 32% agreement for Jurassic World. And that's due to nearly 6 minutes of the video getting lost while converting the video to a YouTube video. So that it could be sent to Katie. So the IOA was only able to be taken on 3 minutes of video time.
Okay, so we had several limitations that we've talked about throughout, and the first one is the baseline data. The original study, as Kayla said, didn't have a baseline phase. It had an existing PE phase, so we had to record our physical activity for the baseline data. By removing the PE phase and scheduling the games, it stopped our ATD, so we then added a third phase to return ourselves to ATD. Weather, as we mentioned earlier, was also an issue with snow, rain, and colder temps, and it caused problems during the phases. Since 2 members, again, live in Indiana, 1 lives in Michigan, and 2 live in Florida. with the weather, space became an issue if we had to complete the games inside. Some of the games would not show that you were moving. The marker would just stay and bounce around. So if you couldn't get outside, then it didn't show as much movement. And then with whole interval recording, when we shared it with the partner, we were only sharing one video out of 6 sessions. And so the data was hard to record if the space was limited and if the marker didn't move. So that's why we had some inconsistencies with our data. We also, for another limitation, had some personal circumstances. We had some illness. Kayla was getting married, so she was unable to complete the at the beginning, and then for the first 2 weeks, and then I was out of town for the first 2 weeks, so schedules were a little different. Another limitation was time management, with all of us trying to balance work and school and schedules. And then the weather, you try to look ahead to see what day you could do it in your schedule, and then the weather would change, and then we'd have to complete it inside, or we were unable to complete it. When we looked at motivation and reinforcement, the Exergames were the presumed reinforcer, but the games were not engaging enough to go outside and brave the weather conditions, like Katie had mentioned earlier. And some of the games, while we were recording, would just stop, and then it would restart at the beginning. So like you weren't moving forward in the game, so it just became a little repetitive. Again, Jessica mentioned earlier about the apps and devices that we decided to go ahead and use our cell phones because we all had cell phones. But when we had to find apps compatible with our cell phones, because 4 of us had Apple devices and 1 had Android, it was hard to find games that were compatible with those types of devices. And then treatment fidelity, like we talked about earlier, Jessica mentioned, it did slip at the beginning. 3 of us went over the first week, our 10-minute session time. 1 went over the second week, and 1 couldn't participate for 2 weeks. So, but once we had a discussion about it, we were all back on track. And next will be Karina.
All right, guys. So in conclusion, we found that the limitations such as the weather conditions, like Carrie mentioned, and personal circumstances affected all of our ability to exercise outdoors and participating in just the exergaming in general. So like all of us mentioned, our results, our IOA, so everything varied by participant. So in all, thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to any questions or comments you guys may have. Thank you.